One of the most iconic franchises in the horror genre has to be the Evil Dead franchise. That, of course, is over 40 years old now and has various different versions, some of which lean more into horror, others lean a little bit more into comedy. And everybody has their favorites on which ones they consider to be better and worse. So because it's Halloween season, I thought what better time than to go back and take a look and see how I personally would rank the Evil Dead franchise. As I always point out with my other lists, this is important to remember this is just my personal list of the way that I would rank the Evil Dead films. So coming in at the bottom is the Evil Dead remake from 2013. Now I don't hate this film, but for me personally, this does lack a lot of what I enjoy and get out of the Evil Dead films. And this one, they unfortunately made the decision to kind of go back to the roots of the original, you could argue, make it very, very ultra dark and serious again. And again, for me personally, that was not the direction I want to see the franchise go in. And in addition to that, also, of course, not having Bruce Campbell there definitely made this one a bit of a difficult watch for me. It's certainly not terrible. There's a lot of really great freaky scare moments in the film. There's some great practical effects. Just being a horror movie, it's perfectly fine, but again, for me, it just lacks so much of what I get out of the Evil Dead movies, and to me, what I find to be unique about the Evil Dead movies. So it's not a bad film, but for me, just compared to the others, it's easily the worst. And then next up, we have the most recent entry in the Evil Dead franchise, Evil Dead Rise. As you can probably imagine, I put this more at the bottom of the list for very much the same reasons as the Evil Dead remake. But this film, I personally did like a fair bit more than the Evil Dead remake. I think it offered something that was a little bit different by taking us to, a new direction. It gave it kind of a bit more of a unique feel to it. But again, much like the Evil Dead remake, this one decided to keep things very, very serious. And I do enjoy it. I think that this is a pretty solid movie. I do have some issues with some creative choices that they decided to make, but for the most part, I think it's a pretty fun movie, and it does have some really, really awesome, gnarly, hard to watch effects. But again, much like the previous film, it does still lack a lot of what I get out of the franchise. But as just being, a fun, original horror movie, it's pretty fun. So that's Evil Dead Rise. And then next up, we have the original The Evil Dead. This, of course, was the one that started it all, and for a lot of people, this is their favorite film of the franchise. And you can see when watching this a lot of the sort of early seeds being planted for adding some of the more comedic elements that will be explored in some of the later films and the TV series later on. And overall, I think that this is just, a really solid, fun to watch, gruesome little low-budget horror film from the early 80s. It just has a certain charm to it that you can't find in a lot of other films, and I can totally understand why for a lot of people they consider this to be the best. But again, for me, this one, of course, it was starting to explore the ideas of mixing horror and comedy together and just, madness, but it hadn't quite committed to it yet. So it was the origins of a lot of the stuff that they would explore in the later films, but it still hadn't quite reached that level yet for me. And then next up, we have Army of Darkness, that for a long time was the end of the franchise, or thought to be, the end of the franchise. This movie, of course, it took, everything that worked so well in Evil Dead 2 and then just ran with it. And it's a very, very unique movie. And it certainly went a lot more into the comedic elements, more so than any of the other movies and the series as well. There's so many great funny comedic elements in this that work really well, but I can understand that for some people why this maybe would be a little bit disappointing if you don't dig the comedic aspects as much, especially with just how much downright silly stuff is in this one. But for me, there's enough of a good balance to where I think that it still works really well as an Evil Dead movie. I think just, Bruce Campbell is just doing so well, just hamming it up in this one, and with all the crazy manic effects, and it's just a blast from beginning to end. So that's Army of Darkness. And then of course, at number 1, to nobody's surprise, is Evil Dead 2. This, I think, for most people, consider this to be the best of the franchise, and my reasons for putting it at number 1 is probably pretty obvious. And it's just the best mix of comedy and horror, not just in the franchise, but it's one of the best mixes of comedy and horror that I think we've ever gotten. And some people would even argue that it is the best mix of comedy and horror that we've ever got. Just something so brilliant, especially in the scenes where it's just Bruce Campbell, it's just Ash being tormented by the Deadites, and just all of the wonderful, crazy effects that we got, but also adding in the comedic aspects as well. It just is just such a great balance of those two worlds. It took everything that worked so well in the first Evil Dead movie and just made it even better. Just the effects are fantastic, the comedic elements are fantastic. Honestly, easily probably one of my favorite horror movies ever, and also my favorite film in the Evil Dead franchise. Alright guys, there you go. That is the way that I would rank the Evil Dead films. Please feel free to jump in the comments down below and let me know how you would rank the Evil Dead movies. And until next time, be sure to consume as much entertainment as humanly possible, and I will see you in the next video.